Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, Wisdom and Virtue in Communication. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. When you think of a physicist, what image comes to mind? It might be someone in a plaid shirt and glasses, the quintessential science nerd. Or perhaps it's a disheveled, middle-aged individual consumed by intellectual pursuits, spouting esoteric terms like wave functions and the Big Bang. If that's the case, then the book we're discussing today, American Prometheus, the inspiration for the major motion picture Oppenheimer, will shatter your preconceptions. Julius Robert Oppenheimer was one of the most extraordinary minds in 20th century physics, laying the groundwork for decades of research to come. However, his most famous contribution was leading the development of the atomic bomb, ushering in the atomic age. He wasn't just a scientist, he was also an advocate for social justice and world peace. Yet, his convictions led to persecution, earning him the nickname, America's Prometheus. His life unfolded against the backdrop of America's rise and witnessed the decline of American ideals. As you might have guessed, unraveling the complexities of such a multifaceted individual was no easy task for the author, Martin J. Sherwin. He began his work as early as 1979, initially estimating that he could complete it in 6 or 7 years. In reality, his colleagues jokingly claimed he was cursed by Oppenheimer and might take the book to his grave. It took a partnership with another author, Kai Bird, and a total of 25 years to finish the book, finally published in 2005. They interviewed Oppenheimer's friends and enemies, accumulating a vast archive of interviews and mountains of records, including FBI surveillance files on Oppenheimer. This epic work, spanning over 700 pages and 500,000 words, stands as the most comprehensive and profound account of Oppenheimer's life. Ultimately, it played a pivotal role in prompting the U.S. government to revoke its erroneous 1954 decision in 2022 and inspired this year's eponymous film. With that, I won't keep you waiting any longer. I've divided this book into 3 parts. The first part delves into Oppenheimer's academic journey before becoming the Oppenheimer we know. Many of his later conflicts and struggles trace their origins to this period. The second part explores how he became the iconic Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. And the third part delves into his tragic downfall, entangled and crushed by the political storm of the Cold War. To understand why Oppenheimer later became so full of contradictions, we must first go back to his student years. It was the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, a time when European empires were in turmoil, yet science was advancing rapidly. People hoped that scientists would bring peace and prosperity. In the United States, an era of progress combining good governance and scientific development began. Many European immigrants, like Oppenheimer's father, came to America to escape turmoil and start anew. Julius Robert Oppenheimer was born in 1904, and his name was rather peculiar. He wanted to conform to American customs while not entirely forsaking the Jewish tradition of not naming after living relatives. So, he used Julius to represent his father's name, Julius. They joined an ethical cultural society founded by Jews, advocating rationalism, humanism, and social concern. Oppenheimer showed remarkable genius from a young age during his school days. He started conducting experiments at the age of 8, mastered Latin and Greek at 9, and gave mineralogy reports to adults at 12. The problem was, he was too exceptional to fit in with his peers. They complained about his arrogance and difficulty in getting close to him. At 14, in an attempt to encourage him to socialize more with kids his age, his parents sent him to a summer camp. Unfortunately, he was bullied there, and he downplayed it in letters to his family, even mentioning some sexual initiation. His parents immediately reported this, and Oppenheimer was seen as a snitch. He was dragged into an ice house, stripped, and beaten, with paint thrown on him. Despite the hostile environment, he endured it for weeks without filing a complaint or quitting, likely developing a fear of informants during this time. His resilience would later help him through many difficult times. In any case, by 1921, when Oppenheimer graduated as a stellar student representative, he had developed a strong interest in both science and literature. He also discussed issues like race and war, as well as the ethics of loyalty and treason under his teacher's guidance. Little did he know that he would be tormented by these issues many years later. This unique school fostered a habit of self-reflection and concern for social issues beyond the classroom, making Oppenheimer stand out among many physicists. He began to feel torn about his identity, as some of his friends thought he was reluctant to be seen as a Jew, even though others saw him that way. During a vacation in 1921, due to a bout of colitis, Oppenheimer visited New Mexico for the first time and fell in love with its natural beauty. He learned to ride horses and appreciated the canyons and desert landscapes, particularly one canyon with a Spanish name, Los Alamos, meaning the poplars. He later said, "I have two great loves, physics and New Mexico." Unfortunately, he couldn't unite the two. In 1923, at the age of 19, Oppenheimer entered Harvard University. He declined a scholarship because his family was already quite wealthy, so he didn't need the money. Oppenheimer took a mishmash of courses at Harvard, including chemistry, French literature, and philosophy. He initially chose chemistry as his major but soon realized that his true interest lay in physics. He applied to the physics graduate program and met Niels Bohr for the first time, a prominent figure in the field who deeply influenced Oppenheimer. In just 3 years, Oppenheimer graduated with top honors, although he admitted later that he often bluffed his way through exams. Despite his straight-A grades, he didn't truly understand the material. He also realized his practical skills were lacking, often making a mess of the laboratory. Oppenheimer declined Harvard scholarship again and applied to Cambridge University. He was finally certain of his interest in theoretical physics. The only problem was that he had little time for socializing. While he was a superstar in the classroom, he had no outlet for his desires and emotions outside of it. He became even more introverted and depressed. These issues would come to a head on the other side of the Atlantic in 1925. Oppenheimer arrived in rainy England in 1925, ready for a multitude of tedious experiments. Being clumsy, he struggled in the laboratory. He recalled daydreaming at the blackboard, rolling on the floor in agony. Although he had few friends, most of them were getting married, making Oppenheimer feel even more isolated. In the autumn of that year, Oppenheimer seemed to prove his madness. He played a practical joke on his advisor, which was discovered by the school and could have led to criminal charges. However, at his parents' urging, it was settled with psychiatric treatment. The doctor diagnosed him with a form of schizophrenia and considered him incurable. Oppenheimer was crushed by his low self-esteem and loneliness. In 1926, at the age of 22, two things happened that would change his life. First, he read Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, which contained a discussion about cruelty. Oppenheimer could recite a passage from it even more than a decade later. He understood from reading it that indifference to the suffering one caused, both to oneself and others, was a terrible form of cruelty. He also realized that internal struggles were not uncommon, allowing him to reconcile with himself. The second thing was reading papers by Schrödinger and Heisenberg, leading him to switch to theoretical physics. Cambridge University was strong in experimental physics but lacked cutting-edge theorists. Upon returning to Cambridge, his mental state had improved significantly. In the summer of that year, he accepted an invitation from the University of Göttingen to join the forefront of physics revolution. It's important to note that while Einstein had already opened the door to quantum physics, from 1925 to 1927, a group of young men, including Oppenheimer's contemporaries like Pauli, Heisenberg, and Dirac, who would later win Nobel Prizes, were the ones driving the physics revolution. They were in their early 20s, and Oppenheimer, now free from the laboratory, thrived in Göttingen. He learned to enjoy social interactions and became an academic star, renowned for his theoretical intuition and frank style. He remained passionate about literature, gaining more admirers through his erudition and generosity. Although he still occasionally fainted in class, in May 1927, Oppenheimer completed his doctoral defense. In just 9 months, he transformed from a depressed and self-conscious youth into a cutting-edge quantum physicist, a frontrunner in the physics revolution. In summary, Oppenheimer's educational journey was shaped by the ethical culture school, where he developed critical thinking and a social conscience. Harvard University provided him with knowledge, but it also fostered his pride and self-importance, which later led to self-doubt and loneliness when he faced difficulties. Fortunately, he didn't give up on reading and research, and these two pursuits helped him gradually reconcile with himself and set his life's direction. He remained restless, eclectic, and through interactions with others, found self-satisfaction. However, his greatest achievements were yet to come, and as he himself said, being a scientist is like climbing a mountain in a tunnel, never knowing if you'll reach the summit or find a dead end. Alright, let's take a closer look at how Oppenheimer became Oppenheimer. This primarily hinges on two key experiences in his life: his leadership at the University of California, Berkeley's physics department, and his involvement in the Manhattan Project. First, in 1929, he made the decision to accept an invitation from the University of California, Berkeley, to begin teaching quantum mechanics in the United States. He encouraged his students to call him by his nickname, Oppie, and together, they explored various possibilities within quantum mechanics. With his unique personal charm, Oppie became a prominent figure in the American theoretical physics community, and Berkeley became the American equivalent of Göttingen. However, he had a habit of opening new doors to problems and then leaving the remaining research to others while he moved on to a different issue. This trait made him widely knowledgeable but also prevented him from receiving a Nobel Prize like some of his colleagues. Oppie was not one to settle, his ambition was too great. He couldn't be satisfied with just one direction, and the self-critical education he received in his youth made him hesitant to fixate on a specific problem. During this period, there were two notable changes in his life, personal and political. In terms of his personal life, he delved into the practices and philosophy of Hinduism, learning Sanskrit and reading Indian epics such as the Bhagavad Gita. He later often gifted this book to his friends. In the Bhagavad Gita, a deity convinces a prince that he should fulfill his destiny of fighting and killing, even if it means fighting against his own kin. This fatalistic perspective appealed to Oppie, offering a refreshing contrast to the individualistic mindset he grew up with. He always held himself to high standards and frequently worried about the consequences of his actions. However, this Indian myth told him that it was okay to simply do his work, as karma would take care of the rest. These conflicting ideologies sometimes motivated him to move forward but also intensified his inner turmoil. On the other hand, these changes made him more socially engaged, especially in politics. Before 1934, he had never been interested in politics. However, when the Nazis came to power in Germany that year and began persecuting his German relatives, and as the Great Depression made life difficult for workers, leading to numerous strikes in California, politics began to invade Oppie's life. Starting in 1936, he became increasingly involved in politics and befriended many left-wing individuals, including the literary professor Savali, who also worked at Berkeley. Moreover, he started dating a woman named Tatlock, who was a member of the American Communist Party. Through Savali and Tatlock, Oppie met more Communist Party members and began donating money to various left-wing organizations, participating in public political discussions. He even organized a teachers' association and called for donations to support the left-wing forces in the Spanish Civil War. At the time, American intellectuals sympathetic to social justice, including the American Communist Party, supported causes they believed in. However, after the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany in August 1939, Oppie started to doubt his affiliations. Although he still wanted to support left-wing organizations to address domestic issues, he began re-evaluating his stance. His relationship with Tatlock was far from peaceful, they constantly found ways to provoke each other, a love-hate dynamic. Oppie recalled that they nearly got married twice but ultimately broke up at the end of that year. However, they remained in contact, and their relationship continued as a friendship until Tatlock's death in 1943. Oppie's new girlfriend, Kitty, was also a member of the American Communist Party. Her previous husband had died fighting for the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War, and she married Oppie after becoming pregnant, following her divorce. She stayed with him until his death. The three of them maintained an open relationship and remained friends for many years. During this time, almost everyone around Oppie was an active member of the American Communist Party, including his brother Frank, his sister-in-law, his wife Tatlock, his landlord, and several of his research students. However, as always, Oppie refused to confine himself to any particular ideological framework. He identified more as a liberal intellectual who sympathized with the American left, rather than a formal member of the American Communist Party. Alright, let's delve into the experiences of the father of the atomic bomb. It was in 1939 when the Germans successfully conducted nuclear fission experiments, releasing a tremendous amount of energy. Just like all physicists of the time, he knew that this could lead to the creation of a superweapon. It wasn't until 2 years later that the United States officially initiated the development of the atomic bomb, known as the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer's exceptional ability to integrate knowledge from various fields made him a natural choice as one of the first recruited scientists for the project. He was tasked with organizing a highly classified seminar, bringing together top theoretical physicists to discuss the design of the atomic bomb. However, there was a catch: his political leanings. The U.S. government was concerned about the possibility of the atomic bomb's technology falling into Soviet hands, despite the two countries being allies at the time. The Manhattan Project was not led by scientists but by the U.S. military, and they had stricter security requirements for military secrecy. As a result, Oppenheimer was initially denied security clearance. In charge of the Manhattan Project at the time was Colonel Groves, who took over in September 1932. He needed a laboratory across the country where experiments involving refining uranium for the bomb could be conducted. A month later, he met Oppenheimer in Berkeley. Oppenheimer proposed that the entire project required extensive interdisciplinary collaboration, with laboratories consolidated in a secluded location for both research and living. Groves was immediately impressed by the idea and sensed Oppenheimer's great ambition. He believed that Oppenheimer's leadership would make him more amenable to military directives. Groves officially appointed Oppenheimer to lead the central laboratory. This opportunity allowed Oppenheimer to combine two of his passions. He suggested locating the laboratory in a canyon in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where a small town was established to accommodate scientists and provide them with a controlled environment for their work. Now, it's important to note that we all know the outcome of the Manhattan Project. What I'm going to discuss is not the success of the project itself, but rather the changes that occurred in Oppenheimer during this period. Firstly, Oppenheimer displayed unexpected leadership qualities. Before this, his friend Robbie believed he couldn't even manage a hamburger stand. However, during the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer not only served as the head of Los Alamos but also emerged as a leader in all American scientific departments. He made the most of his erudition and charisma, actively participating in discussions, promoting interdisciplinary communication, helping scientists reach consensus, and guiding the rational progression of the project. Key aspects such as the technical approach to building an atomic bomb and methods of detonation were decisions he contributed to. Under his management, many top scientists from various countries joined the project, each contributing their expertise. For instance, physicist Edward Teller, who was insubordinate and obsessed with developing a fusion weapon, was assigned by Oppenheimer to focus on theoretical research for the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer used his personal charm to unite all scientists, maintaining a culture of openness and transparency in developing a weapon that would have a profound impact on human history. The success of Los Alamos elevated Oppenheimer to the status of a role model in the American scientific community, possibly the most influential scientist in the country. Secondly, Oppenheimer displayed political naivete during this time. Initially, he acquiesced to wearing military uniforms at Los Alamos and agreed to a requirement that all laboratory leaders join the military. He seemed to believe that compliance would prevent further scrutiny from the authorities. It wasn't until his close friend Robbie persuaded him that he realized that militarizing the laboratory's scientists was not the way to go. Instead, he needed to enhance the organizational management of the laboratory. Oppenheimer eventually steered the project in the right direction. However, unfortunately, Robbie, as the one who could directly point out Oppenheimer's mistakes, refused to participate in the mass production of weapons of mass destruction for the military. Like many American scientists with left-leaning tendencies, Oppenheimer was still distrusted by the U.S. military. It wasn't until 1943, after working for some time and enduring multiple interrogations and lengthy investigations, that Oppenheimer finally obtained the highest-level security clearance. The most significant event that influenced this process was the Shivali incident. In an attempt to protect his friends, Oppenheimer began fabricating stories during several inquiries, contradicting himself in the process. In 1954, this inconsistency became decisive evidence of his unreliability. We will delve into the details of this incident later. In other words, contrary to what most scientists initially thought, the atomic bomb was not initially intended to defeat the Nazis. Oppenheimer failed to realize that the U.S. military aimed to monopolize nuclear weapons for world dominance. Finally, Oppenheimer began to exert more influence on the U.S. government's decisions as a scientific advisor. The Manhattan Project provided Oppenheimer with his first substantial opportunity to connect with high-ranking government officials. He quickly discovered that his personal charisma could influence not only students but also influential decision-makers in the United States. In particular, in 1943, his longtime idol, Bohr, also arrived at Los Alamos, which greatly inspired him. Bohr told Oppenheimer that unless they could share information about nuclear weapons with countries like the Soviet Union before atomic bombs were deployed and invite them to join an international nuclear weapons control agreement, the existence of these devastating weapons would force the Soviets to develop their own nuclear arsenal. If a nuclear arms race were to begin, humanity would never find peace. Bohr wanted to share the secrets of nuclear weapons to bring the world into a more open and less hostile era. Oppenheimer realized that this wasn't just about a big bomb, it could bring about the self-destruction of human society. To summarize once more, Oppenheimer underwent 2 successful management experiences at Berkeley and Los Alamos, making him a leader in the American scientific community. He became the representative of scientists in the U.S. government's decision-making circles. He increasingly relied on his knowledge and prestige to influence the U.S. government and the general public. However, the delicate balance between being a scientist and a politician eluded Oppenheimer. When facing the calculations of politics, he was often too naive. He insisted on openness and transparency and opposed the continued development of nuclear weapons, which antagonized too many people. He would soon come to realize this. Next, let's take a look at the tragedy of the father of the atomic bomb. There are mainly 2 events: the failure of the International Atomic Energy Control Mechanism and the public humiliation at the security clearance hearing. These were the results of American politics prevailing over science. First, let's discuss the first tragedy. By 1944, when it became clear that Germany would be defeated in the war, many scientists began to question whether the development of the atomic bomb should continue. Oppenheimer once again convinced them that this dreadful weapon, once its power was known to the entire world, should be placed under the control of the newly established United Nations. However, there were differing opinions among scientists. Physicists like von Neumann, Taylor, and Lawrence opposed limiting the use of nuclear weapons. They believed that the United States should develop even more powerful nuclear weapons to deter the Soviet Union and other countries. Nevertheless, by 1945, when the nuclear experiments were finally completed, Oppenheimer and most scientists hoped that the use of nuclear weapons in Japan would mark the last time humanity would use them. However, even the scientists themselves underestimated the power and allure of nuclear weapons. Oppenheimer later recalled that he thought of the Bhagavad Gita and silently uttered the line, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," before the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Until then, Oppenheimer had been lobbying the U.S. government to share information with the Soviet Union before the use of nuclear weapons, believing that failing to do so would only intensify Soviet fears of the United States. However, the excessive secrecy principles embodied by Los Alamos not only restricted scientific research but also harmed peaceful coexistence among humans. Oppenheimer's suggestions were not accepted by the new president, Truman, and the focus of American diplomacy rapidly shifted towards confrontation with the Soviet Union. Ultimately, the decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan, besides hastening Japan's surrender, was partly motivated by the desire to achieve military success before the Soviet Union entered the war, ensuring that Japan's surrender would be to the United States rather than the Soviet Union. The second tragedy, which occurred in 1954, saw Oppenheimer's security clearance revoked and him publicly humiliated. So, who were the people that Oppenheimer had crossed paths with? The author provides insight into this with exclusive archive materials. Firstly, there was J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, which had been monitoring Oppenheimer's activities since the post-war period. Hoover, as the director of the FBI, had been keeping an eye on Oppenheimer since the 1930s, conducting massive surveillance, wiretaps, tracking, and even kidnapping and assassinations of people he suspected of being government critics. Oppenheimer was on Hoover's radar, and Hoover even considered Oppenheimer's former girlfriend, Tatlock, to be a possible Soviet spy. Evidence suggests that Tatlock's death in 1943 may have been an assassination rather than suicide. In 1946, when the FBI began its secret investigation into people connected to atomic bombs, Oppenheimer mentioned the person who might need investigation but didn't report it to the Security Department. He only casually mentioned that there might be someone worth checking. However, this could not stop a thorough investigation, and he eventually had to inform Groves privately about the matter. When the FBI investigated this matter in 1946, he told the truth, leading to inconsistencies in his statements, which later became decisive evidence against him in 1954. Secondly, there were academic adversaries represented by Edward Teller. Oppenheimer had always been skeptical about the feasibility of the hydrogen bomb, which troubled Teller deeply. Teller later co-founded a new national laboratory capable of developing nuclear weapons, which Oppenheimer opposed, advocating against further collaboration between the U.S. military and the academic community. Teller was not concerned that hydrogen bombs with unlimited power could destroy humanity. He believed that the more destructive the bomb, the less likely it would be used, and he did not carry the moral burden of developing such weapons. Teller and his allies had a strong conservative leaning and could not accept Oppenheimer's popularity. Finally, there was the right-wing political power within the U.S. government, represented by Lewis Strauss, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. Strauss, who gained political influence through his wealth on Wall Street, gradually rose in the political ranks. In 1946, he was appointed to the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission by President Truman. Strauss, who also represented the Princeton Board of Trustees, invited Oppenheimer to serve as the new chairman of the Institute for Advanced Study. However, Oppenheimer declined to share administrative control of the institute with Strauss, which angered Strauss. From the outset, Strauss did not like Oppenheimer. Strauss supported the U.S. military's strategy of massive nuclear retaliation to deter the Soviet Union rather than establishing a nuclear control agreement. In 1949, after the Soviet Union conducted nuclear tests, the situation worsened. The United States quickly decided to research the hydrogen bomb to maintain its nuclear advantage. Oppenheimer, representing scientists, openly opposed continuing the arms race with the Soviet Union and was at odds with many people. This ultimately led to the second tragedy in 1954, when Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked, and he was publicly humiliated. Strauss continued to manipulate the Atomic Energy Commission and managed to obtain recordings of Oppenheimer's testimony in 1949. He used Oppenheimer's recollection of details as evidence of inconsistency, claiming that he was lying. Oppenheimer's biting humor, although sometimes charming, occasionally crossed the line. Most importantly, Strauss united all the anti-Oppenheimer forces, and in 1953, he was appointed chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission by President Eisenhower, who supported a nuclear retaliation strategy. Strauss immediately set out to undermine Oppenheimer, instructing McCarthy to leave Oppenheimer's case to the Atomic Energy Commission. He prepared a summary of the case, claiming that Oppenheimer was undoubtedly a member of the Communist Party, and that he repeatedly lied. Strauss even bribed members of the Atomic Energy Commission to ensure that Oppenheimer's security clearance was ultimately revoked. This hearing essentially declared to the scientific community that reason had been overtaken by American politics, and from that point onwards, scientists were no longer saviors but were instead relegated to conducting technical research assigned by the U.S. military. During the Cold War, American political polarization and hysteria gradually consumed rationality and neutrality. In the aftermath, an increasing number of scientists were incorporated into the framework of the military-industrial complex. Taylor and Lawrence defeated their former colleague and raised their voices in support of American militarism and right-wing politics, becoming the new spokespeople for science. Later, Oppenheimer gradually withdrew from academia. However, he couldn't retire to New Mexico because Los Alamos had become a permanent U.S. national laboratory. He found solace on a peaceful Pacific island until 1963 when the U.S. government symbolically exonerated him. It was only then that he regained the respect of the public. 4 years later, at the age of 62, Oppenheimer succumbed to throat cancer. In summary, during this unique wartime period, Oppenheimer united various forces. However, after the atomic bomb exploded, there was a chain reaction in the United States. The previously united factions quickly fragmented. The faction that solely wanted to use the atomic bomb to achieve selfish goals gained the upper hand, disregarding the potential destructive consequences. In this process, Oppenheimer's naive and contradictory aspects were exposed, similar to when he endured hardships in an ice cellar at the age of 14. However, this couldn't change anything. In the end, he could only become the Galileo of the Cold War era, a scientific mentor. But this wasn't what he initially wanted. Due to space limitations, I can only interpret the essence of this book up to this point. Oppenheimer's triumphs and tragedies can be summarized in one sentence: when society respects reason and science, both scientists and society thrive, but when society succumbs to madness, both scientists and society face tragedy. The atomic bomb could be the pinnacle of physics for 300 years, or it could be the result of human ignorance, arrogance, and destruction. Oppenheimer was full of contradictions and struggles. He dedicated his life to social justice and reason, but his name is forever associated with the painful mushroom cloud and destruction. He was born into privilege and had conversations with great scientists like Einstein, but he cared deeply about the suffering of the underprivileged in society. As a physicist, he entered the field of quantum physics at the end of the great theoretical revolution in physics in the early 20th century, exploring many new directions. However, he had abundant energy and was too cautious, not liking to delve deeply into specific issues. He was not good at conducting experiments, which made his academic journey difficult. Nevertheless, he led a large team and completed one of the most important scientific experiments in human history. He was charismatic, but he could be blunt and outspoken, which offended many people. His scientific research was complex and difficult to understand, but he had a deep love for poetry. In areas where his colleagues believed he was wasting time, he found inner peace. As the acknowledged father of the atomic bomb, he ushered in the atomic age but became deeply involved in opposing its proliferation. In the hysterical American politics of the Cold War era, this led to his persecution. So why should we get to know Oppenheimer? Because he reminds us not to fear anxiety, even geniuses struggle and contradict themselves like ordinary people. He reminds us not to give up on reflection and to be cautious about the impact of technology on society. He advises us not to be cruel and to always care about the suffering of others. He reminds us that technology is in human hands and should be dismantled with the principles of openness and fairness to dissolve human mistrust in technology. I'll conclude with his words: in this world, each of us must know our limitations, understand our superficial sins. Wisdom is worth spreading, opening a brighter future. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share with your family and friends. Wisdom deserves to be shared. Let's embark on a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.